ask you a couple of questions about your life during the Cold War.
No, not at all.
First, when were you born?
Born November 1956.
Okay. What does the Cold War mean to you? Can you give us a brief
The
explanation?
Cold War mainly it's between two superpower,
Yeah.
the Soviet Union and with all the communist countries, and mainly on the other side, the United States with the Western countries of Europe.
Okay. When you were a child, did you hear people talking about nuclear weapons, and how were the general feelings about these weapons to you?
That was general conversation on TV and mainly news. Everybody used to talk about it. So newspaper, news on TV, all was about nuclear weapon. So it was something scary because nobody knew if it's gonna happen or not.
Okay, thanks. So, did you understand who the enemy was, and how was the enemy typically portrayed in your society during the time?
You know, we were living in Lebanon, so it was a kind of.
Yeah.
There were both parties that were involved in kind of war against each other. So we cannot say who was the enemy exactly. Both
Okay.
of them, each party has its own interest. So as far as interest goes, of course the other party is the enemy.
Okay. But,
So for the American US, of course the Soviet Union was the evil empire, so the worst enemy. And vice versa for the Soviet Union, the NATO power
yeah.
led by the American and the Western Europe countries. Of course they were the bad guys and they were the enemy. So it's a war of interest. Isn't it?
Okay. Okay, and what about during your stay in the US? Was there any impact or anything?
Sure, of course. That was during the presidency of President Reagan, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
So that was the peak moment of the Cold War between Soviet Union and the United States, and that was exactly President Reagan who was calling the Soviet Union the evil empire.
Okay.
So it was really scary because you couldn't know when.
How old were you?
It could be like a nuclear war happening anytime, but still, it was not that much serious at the moment because at that time I was doing my postgrad study.
So about 2022?
In the United States. That was 1982
Oh,
till
okay.
till 1986.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was like kind of 4 years almost. So that was a very historical moment of the Cold War between both parties.
Yeah. Next, when you were younger, did you ever hear about or see a bomb shelter? What supplies did people put in bomb shelters inside, and why? And what feelings did you have about these bomb shelters, if you saw them?
I remember the bomb shelter and so forth during the civil war of Lebanon,
Yeah.
and even before the civil war in 1967 during the war between the Arabs and the Israeli.
Yeah.
At that time,
What about in the US?
we were instructed to prepare for shelter and anything like that during maybe in case of emergency or bombing or shelling or air attack from the Israeli. So we were instructed to keep the lights at night shut off, okay, and go to the basement.
What about in the US? Did you see the shelter bomb?
At that time, no, there was nothing like that at the school or at the university. I never heard about this. No, it was not
In the US?
serious
Okay.
it was not serious enough
Yeah.
to talk about shelter. But only we hear about on the news, TV, or read on newspaper.
Yeah.
Nothing much, or nothing more than that.
Were you ever afraid of nuclear weapons?
Everybody is afraid of nuclear weapon, but things are like.
But at the time, like you guys were.
At one time it was very scary, but
Yeah.
that was a long time ago, in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
Between probably that was the presidency of JFK,
Taylor.
Kennedy.
Oh, Kennedy. Sorry.
Yeah, John Kennedy. So it was at that time there were threats from the Soviet Union to put nuclear weapon to put nuclear weapon in Cuba.
Okay.
And Cuba was not very far from the U.S. It's it's just a few
Yeah,
kilometers.
it's close.
Hundreds of kilometers. So that was a scary moment, but things were quiet after, and politics has done its work.
Okay. Can you describe someone you admired during the time period, or someone you remember? And
Maybe, yeah. If you mean U.S. citizen or U.S. Politician,
Yeah, for example.
I would admire President Carter maybe,
Oh, okay.
because he was like kind of looking for peace, especially
Yeah.
in the Middle East problem between the Arabs and the Israeli. He works hard for that,
Okay.
or he worked hard for that, but it's a tough problem to resolve.
Yeah.
But he did his best.
Yeah. Did you remember watching on television or hearing on the radio something like that stayed in your mind at the time?
About Cold War?
Yeah, during the Cold War. Like on the news and the media.
There was always, at one time or the other, there was always tension between
Yeah.
the two parties. So every decade there was like a war, like let's say during the Cold War there was Vietnam War. There was also some problems in Europe,
Conflicts,
in
and
Eastern
yeah,
Europe. So when the Soviet Union or the Russians,
yeah.
they invaded Czechoslovakia in Prague, and
Yeah.
that was the Spring of Prague or something like that they call it. So it was always producing tension every time. And during the war also, the Middle East, some the Soviet were backing the Egyptian, and the
Yeah.
American, they were backing the Israeli. So this is Cold War, and it was not Cold War in itself, but
It led like conflict.
yeah, but it's part of it. It was a consequence of this, but it was only limited in the Middle East, not spread around the globe or around the
Okay.
Europe or across Europe. It was just limited in the Middle East.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
You are most welcome, my dear friend.
Thanks. So, when were you born?
I was born in 1955, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay. What does the Cold War mean to you?
Cold War was that time when the United States and Russia, although not actively involved in a war, fighting each other directly, were doing all kinds of things against each other everywhere on the planet.
Okay.
So,
When you were a child, did you hear people talking about the nuclear weapons, and how were the general feelings about these weapons to you?
yeah, talked about them all the time. We had to do drills, anti-nuclear weapon drills in grade school. Yeah, they'd line you up, put you underneath your desk, put your hands over your head. Sometimes, at one point, they moved it and then we sat in the hallway instead of under our desk. Like that would make a better if a nuclear bomb hit. So yeah, and there was also a lot of people talking about building shelters, building their own little bomb shelters. There was a couple people in our town that had them, so they could go down there in case the bomb was going to go.
Okay. Did you understand who the enemy was, and how was the enemy typically portrayed in your society?
We definitely knew it was the Russians. The Soviets, I
Yeah.
guess you'd say, although they're sort of interchangeable. They shouldn't have been, but they were. We called them Russians, but and they were Boris Badenov, just like from
Yeah.
Rocky and Bullwinkle. They were the bad guys, and they were the bad guys in cartoons and movies. You saw it in James Bond, all kinds of things. They were the bad guys, and we were the good guys.
Yeah.
They were Khrushchev with his shoe banging on the podium.
Okay. And were you ever afraid of nuclear weapons?
Yeah. We thought we were all going to go. That's how we were. It's just a matter of time before the world was going to be destroyed. It was a daily thing for them to announce things like, "We now have enough weapons to destroy the world this many times over." And one time it was 10 times over, and then it was 20 times over. So there was enough bombs that everybody could go.
Okay. Last question. Do you remember anything like on TV or that you watched when you were small?
Yeah. I remember watching the news with the Soviet missile crisis. That was a major thing. We talked about that. But it was always on the news. There's always something about a battle somewhere on a planet with Russia. They were doing something. That's where Korea. That's where Vietnam, Central America. They were always trying to Cuba. They were always trying to. They were after us, and we had to make sure that they weren't going to get us when we went to sleep at night.
Thank you. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Je vais te poser quelques questions de la guerre froide avant de commencer.
Bien sûr, avec plaisir.
Ok. Quand vous êtes né,
Je suis née en France en 1971.
qu'est-ce que la guerre froide signifie pour vous?
Dans l'ensemble, c'était une guerre entre l'Union soviétique et les États-Unis. Mais bien sûr, ce qui a conduit à d'autres conflits qui ont surgi dans le monde entier.
Oui. Et lorsque vous étiez enfant, qu'est-ce que vous entendez parler les gens sur les armes nucléaires et comment étaient les sentiments généraux au sujet de ces armes?
Bien sûr, nous avons entendu parler des armes nucléaires. Que nous allions, par exemple, sur les nouvelles et chacun s'allions terrifié par les armes nucléaires.
Avez-vous compris qui était l'ennemi? Comment était l'ennemi généralement représenté dans votre société?
Il était évident que l'ennemi était la Russie. Les nouvelles bandes dessinées, médias, tout montrait l'ennemi que la Russie. À l'époque, j'étais en France, j'ai aussi visité les États-Unis pour une couple d'années et nous avons donc dû tout simplement de s'en tenir à l'ennemi, la Russie.
Oui. Quand vous étiez plus jeune, avez-vous jamais entendu parler ou vu un abri? Quelles sont les fournitures avez-vous vues dans les abris?
Je n'ai pas vraiment rappelé, vous, les détails de celui-ci, mais je l'ai sûrement voir des abris. Je veux dire, à partir de ce nom, vous pouvez dire qu'il y avait des fournitures pour les gens à vivre en eux, pour un montant spécifique de temps, alimentaire la plus importante.
Ah oui. Étiez-vous jamais eu peur des armes nucléaires?
Tout le monde avait peur des armes nucléaires,
Oui.
en particulier l'époque. Je me souviens, dans mon école, nous avions d'urgence mis en place juste au cas où ce n'était pas du plaisir.
Ok, merci pour ton temps.
Merci pour vous.